Well, Andy Burnham has ended his first week in office amid growing domestic economic challenges as well as an increasingly uncertain global environment. To discuss the new government's priorities and challenges, we are joined by John Grogan, former Labour Party member of the British Parliament. Mr. Grogan, thank you for joining Asia One News. How did the measures Andy Burnham has announced in his first week compare to Keir Starmer's when he first came into office 2 years ago?
Well, I think Andy Burnham's great virtue is he's a good communicator and he has a sunny outlook on life. So whereas Keir, when he came into office, stressed all the problems the country was in and is still in, Andy Burnham was determined in his first week to give a number of relatively small measures, but trying to show that he was on the people's side. For example, he's reducing bus fares across the country. And I was on a bus yesterday and passengers were discussing it. It's that sort of populism, if you like, of the left of centre that I think he's trying to engage directly with the public.
First major policy announcements say about what his priorities could be moving forward?
Well, one of his big priorities will be decentralisation of the country. He comes from the north of England, as I do, so he's a Manchester man, and his critique of British policy over many years is that we've been too centralised as a country and that a lot of the economic energy of the big cities of Manchester, Liverpool, Leeds, Newcastle and so on have rather been underplayed in recent years. So he wants to devolve power out to the regions, and this will be one of his themes. The cost of living, though, will be his most immediate thing because a lot of people are feeling the pressures of inflation brought upon them by the crisis in the world and so on at the moment, and he'll be trying to adopt a number of measures to deal with that. And he's also said social care is one of his priorities. We've got a population that is getting more elderly, as many Western countries have, and that's going to be a big cost. And so he's going to have to find the money for that and also for defence expenditure as well. So there's a lot of pressures on him.
You aren't familiar with the geography and the regional differences in the UK. Could you talk us through why establishing a number 10 North office in Manchester has resonated with so many people?
Well, yes. I mean, the north of England is famous for many things, whether it be the football, the Manchester United, Liverpool, whether it be the music, going back to the Beatles and so on. But the north of England has always felt it was a bit looked down on, if you like, by the south of England, by the London establishment. So the idea of having a second number 10, that symbol that is known out throughout the world, but having it in the middle of Manchester does resonate with many people in the north, thinking that it's not just a symbolic gesture, that there'll be people doing serious jobs in the north of England. And it also means that civil servants and so on have an ear to the views of not just the north of England, but everyone outside London, really, whether that be the nations of Scotland and Wales and Northern Ireland, or whether it be the great cities of the north of England. So it's something that's very viscerally felt by many people who have found during their after graduation, for example, that many people have to go to London for work, and they don't want to do that. They want to live in the north of England and find work there.
And do you think he has what it takes to unite not just the country, but the Labour Party and avoid the fate of the 6 prime ministers that came before?
Well, he'll do his very best. I mean, the trouble of having a coup, and it was a bloodless coup. Keir Starmer went with great grace and so on, but there's obviously some people who will resent him taking over as prime minister, and so he will have enemies on the backbenches and so on and things. So it will not be easy for him, and he'll have to deal with all the problems of the world as well. But if he can keep that sunny outlook, the initial outlook in the polls is quite good for him. He's now come level with Nigel Farage, who is the major opposition at the moment from the right-wing Reform Party. They're about level, whereas previously Labour were well behind.
John Healey has to navigate boosting economic growth while keeping public finances under control. Is this an impossible task, do you think?
It's a very difficult task because we haven't got much money, though the one thing that Keir Starmer left was that the growth figures are looking a little bit better, and so Andy Burnham will be desperate to try and get growth back into the British economy, and in order to make some of those economic choices easier. Otherwise, we've got big bills on social care, on defence and so on, and it will not be easy to square that circle because he'll want to maintain the confidence the markets as well. The last thing he wants is obviously a run on the pound.
And you touched on this already, but a lot of focus this week has been on domestic policy. But what sort of foreign policy challenges would the new PM have to tackle?
Well, I think two really. In the medium to long term, Europe is the obvious one. I mean, we have to get closer to our allies in Europe, both economically and militarily, given the threats from Russia and so on and things. So that I think he'd be anxious not to go back into the European Union, but to develop more cooperation with countries in Europe. And in the short term, he'll be doing everything he can. And he seems to have had quite a good phone call with President Trump. But you can be up with President Trump one moment and down the other. So I think he'll be wary of that. But he'll be using what influence Britain has to support peace moves in the Middle East, because that could sink not just Britain's prospects, the prospects of many countries around the world, if that war was to reignite again. And I think there'll be many hours spent on trying to persuade the countries involved, support Pakistan in their efforts of mediation and so on, and get to a stable situation there as quickly as possible.
And what's your assessment of his early performance so far?
I'd say 8 out of 10, really. He's certainly lifted the spirits of the Labour Party, and I think lifted the spirits of the country. I think the one thing he's got to be careful of, and he's still getting used to being Prime Minister, he has a tendency, a little bit like, and he won't thank me for this comparison, but it's a little bit Trump-like in some senses. He tends to muse a little bit when he's asked a question. He tries to answer it honestly, and he's got himself into some interesting situations this week where he's made one or two comments on tax, which you can make as a mayor of Manchester or whatever, but when you're Prime Minister of the country, the markets move on your every word. So I think he's got to be a little bit careful about that. He's got to be careful of every word he says now has influence.
Mr. John Grogan, thank you. Always good to get your thoughts.